All right, here we go. Very rainy, very cloudy, very gloomy Thursday. We're going to get into conditioning and how they did it. They're going to have a video on classical conditioning. They're going to have a video on operant conditioning, but they started out with a video on basically like the history and big psychologists and big experiments related to conditioning. So just kind of a quick rundown. Again, structuralism. That is looking at the structures of the mind, the structures of the brain. What is consciousness made of? Okay, so as we're very aware, as we are processing things, right? What structures allow that to happen? So that was Wilhelm Wundt and Edward Titchener. Next one is going to be functionalism. That's William James. So what are the functions of the mind, and basically what is the function of consciousness? What is the purpose of consciousness? What is the purpose of all this very aware perception? Next one is phrenology, 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 Franz, Franz, Franz Gall. So is there a connection between our physical body and our mental processes, right? Phrenology, this connection between our mind, our brain, our neurology, right? And how our body moves. And then Freud and the psychodynamic, again, that is all unconscious. So how do unconscious processes impact our thoughts and feelings, right? So all the stuff that we have repressed, all the stuff that we have driven back into our unconscious, and all the stuff that lies in our unconscious, how does that impact our temper? How does that impact our sense of humor? How does that impact our outlook on life? Okay, so kind of to get the ball rolling, Pavlov and classical conditioning. Again, I'm just going to kind of introduce some of this stuff because they have their own videos on classical and operant conditioning. So Pavlov, classical conditioning, he was looking at reflexes. How can he condition reflexes? So for a lot of the classical conditioning, it's not really necessarily behaviors. It's not very conscious. It is kind of reflexes, right? Things that are natural, things that are automatic. And he wanted to know if he could condition or train or teach reflexes, right? So he had the dog, Pavlov's dog, he had the dog, we'll just call it Meat, and a bell. And he wanted to see if he could train that dog to have a reflex of salivation at the bell. And we know that he did. There is a difference again between reflexes and behaviors. Our behaviors, we are more intentional. Our behaviors, kind of include more of our conscious, and reflexes aren't, right? It's very rapid. It's very natural. It's very automatic. So classical conditioning is reflexive. Operant conditioning is going to be behavioral. So classical conditioning, reflexive, condition, reflexes, not so much behavior. Learning happens when a reflex occurs to a new stimulus. So as you are exposed to a new stimulus and you react to it, right? Very natural, but as you react to it and you do that repetition over time, that is learning, right? So that dog, Pavlov's dog, even though they were reflexes, Pavlov's dog learned over time, several repetitions, to take that new stimulus, right, that bell, that chime, and pair it with the steak, and then he learned, right, he was conditioned to salivate at the sound of the bell. Okay, so behaviors, again, behavior learning happens when a relatively permanent change in behavior repetition is brought about by different circumstances. Okay, so behavior is learning happens when a relatively permanent change in behavior or your reaction is brought about by different circumstances. Okay, so learning can be observed, learning can be measured. The results would give you the dependent variable. Let's see here. Okay, so John B. Watson. Remember, Pavlov was reflexes. Watson is going to be emotions. Remember, he's trying to make little Albert cry. So can you teach someone emotions? Can you teach someone to cry, to be scared, right? Can you condition that? So Pavlov was reflexes. John B. Watson is going to be emotions. So remember, little Albert was completely fine the first time he came across this white rat. No crying. He didn't crawl away from him or anything like that. He's pretty neutral. And what Watson is going to do is he's going to take that white rat, and every time he puts it in front of little Albert, he's going to bang pipes together. He's going to make this really loud sound. And he's going to scare little Albert. And over time, remember, repetitions, over time, it's going to bring about a change in his emotions. Every time he sees that white rat, he's going to cry. He's going to associate that white rat with a loud bang coming. And so John B. Watson figures out, yeah, I can train, I can condition, I can teach, I can have someone learn to be scared of any stimulus. John Garcia, the name doesn't sound familiar to you, but in a second, his research will. But John Garcia is going to be more about aversion and taste aversion. Can you teach someone to hate, to be disgusted by a certain taste? And he does this in a couple different ways, but he's going to be involved in the coyote study that we talked about, in which, these coyotes kept killing sheep, and the sheep farmers wanted it to stop, right? And so basically they used Garcia's taste aversion study, and they put out a bunch of wool, and they put out a bunch of lamb meat, and they just leave it out, and the coyotes come and they eat it. What the coyotes don't know is that they had kind of laced it with poison, low levels of poison, and it made the coyotes very, very sick. And over time, as they continued eating, this poison lamb meat, and as they continued sniffing around and messing with this wool they would come across, they eventually created an aversion, right? A hatred, a disgust for sheep. And it went to the extent where when they would see sheep, they would actively run away. They would it was like they were terrified of it. So he conditioned them to have a taste aversion. Thorndike's law of effect. So this is all about trial and error, right? So can you teach someone, or do they just try and they keep messing up and they just learn from their own mistakes, right? So behavior is the consequences of previous actions, right? So Thorndike's law of effect. Behavior is a result of previous actions, previous mistakes, more specifically. So the consequences of previous actions will influence future actions, right? You've all been there. Hopefully you've all learned from a mistake before, and that's what Thorndike tells us is learning, right? So he uses this to measure and track learning. He did the kind of system where you put animals in a maze, and they'll try to get from the beginning to the end. They'll try to get to the cheese at the end of the maze, for example, with a rat. And they'll continuously mess up, but they will learn from their mistakes, and eventually they'll find the right way. You put them back in, they might mess up again, but they'll find the right way. You put them back in again, and it gets quicker and quicker and quicker. So what he does is he actually puts a cat in a maze, and again, dozens and dozens and dozens of probably hundreds of instances. Same cat, boom, starts the timer. And I don't have the times, but pretty slow the first time, right? Gets a little faster. And at the end, he is directly going to the end of the maze. And so this shows that the cat was learning from previous actions. The cat was learning from previous mistakes made. B.F. Skinner, this is where we're going to get into operant conditioning. Remember, operant conditioning, behavior, and operant conditioning is more choice, more conscious, right? You are choosing, your behavior. Find the cause of behavior is what Skinner wanted. He used Skinner boxes because he had a very controlled, a very distinct, a very confined, experimental location. It gave him a lot of experimental control, right? So he was able to eliminate a lot of confounding variables. He was able to eliminate a lot of coincidences and outside factors by using these boxes, these enclosed boxes, right? So Skinner boxes gave him experimental control. For B.F. Skinner, operant behavior is going to come down to people. I'll go with people, but people will behave a certain way, and he says it's all based on reward or punishment or reinforcement, right? So students behave well in class because either they want to be rewarded or because they don't want to be punished, or they've been previously punished, or because they're looking for some kind of reinforcement, right? Some kind of congratulations. So, and again, we'll get into operant conditioning later. Wolfgang Kohler, he is the opposite of Thorndike. You can actually YouTube some of this Wolfgang Kohler stuff, where it's not trial and error, but people or animals are very intelligent. And I think Kohler, you can YouTube it, but I think Kohler has like the monkeys and stuff like that. And I think they're doing like finger painting and they're doing math and they're drawing it and they're doing really, really interesting stuff. And it shows that they're being taught. That's not just previous mistakes. It's not just trial and error, but animals are capable of being taught. But yeah, if you want to YouTube insight learning, Wolfgang Kohler, you can see some pretty cool stuff on animal behavior. Albert Bandura, most notable for his Bobo doll experiment. So Albert Bandura, that's all going to be social learning, aka observational learning, aka vicarious learning. So the Bobo doll experiment, remember, you got a bunch of kids watching an adult play with a Bobo doll, and when the kids are released into the room with Bobo doll, they kind of repeat what they observed, right? And then another round of kids watches an adult punch and be somewhat violent towards the Bobo doll. And when the kids are released, they're the same way. They're treating it like a punching bag, right? And then you have another round where they watch an adult or an older kid really be very violent, very aggressive, maybe even hitting it with foreign objects. And when you release the kids to the Bobo doll, again, they mimic that same kind of thing, right? So kids learn from their observation, right? Kids have they watch other kids. And if other kids are beating up this Bobo doll and they're not getting in trouble, then when it's their turn, they're going to beat up the Bobo doll as well. And, again, we'll get into more detail later, but that brings about modeling, right? That these adults and these older kids were modeling appropriate behavior with the Bobo doll, and the kids learn from that, and boom, they utilize that same behavior that was modeled to them. Now, he will tell you that the kids have to have motivation to do that. They have to have opportunity, and they have to have ability. So, for the Bobo doll, yep, they gave them the opportunity. If they were physically able to throw punches, they could do that. And if they were motivated, probably, watching other kids do it, then they would do that same behavior. Let's see here. Emotional learning, again, emotional learning is going to tie hand in hand with like taste aversion and phobias. So again, you can condition someone basically to have a phobia, right? Little Albert, those coyotes, that kind of conditioning resulted in emotional learning, right? Those coyotes were disgusted by the previous taste that they had. Little Albert gained a phobia to that white rat and would cry at the sight of a white rat. So emotional learning is going to really resonate because it brings about, physical symptoms like crying and screaming. And obviously, this neurological conditioning, it's very, very impactful. So you can think about, bee stings, spiders messing with you, food poisoning, or food that you thought had made you sick, a fear of roller coasters, or having previously seen a roller coaster break or get stuck. That kind of stuff is emotional learning, and it conditions you to stick with that, right? So I can't track it down, but at some point in my life had some kind of emotional learning lesson with melted cheese, and still at 35 I don't eat melted cheese. It's all in my head. I eat cold cheese, right? I'll even eat I'll eat pizza and stuff like that, but there's just some melted cheese that I can't do. And I don't know if it's a texture thing, I don't know if it's an emotional thing from when I was younger, but it's a result of some kind of emotional impact from a younger age. Learned helplessness, and you guys should be pretty good on this. We've gone over it in detail the last couple of years. So that's back in the 1960s. So basically how this guy, Martin Seligman is his name. So basically what he does is very unethical, but he puts dogs in a kind of like a Skinner box, but he puts dogs in a box and he shocks them, right? So the dogs cannot escape, and they will be repeatedly shocked. Now, not shocked to death or anything, but they will be repeatedly shocked. And And essentially what he does is he takes these dogs, I don't know why I'm laughing, but he takes these dogs that he has more or less tortured with electric shock, and he's going to put them in a new box. The new box has shock, but allows them to move around to get to a part of the box that does not shock them, right? So they go from essentially a torture box into a new box. That new box does have a shock floor, but if they just move, if they just run, if they jump away, they'll get to the part that has no shock whatsoever. And when he puts the previously shocked dogs in that, they just give up. They don't try to run away. They don't try to escape. They just think, here it is. I'm screwed again. I'm going to get shocked. And they essentially cower and allow it to happen. When he takes dogs that had not been previously shocked and he puts them in this box, as soon as they get shocked, they run. They try to get away. They try to jump off of that grid. They had not developed a sense of learned helplessness. So the dogs who had been previously tortured, beat down, made to feel like crap, scared, terrified, whatever you want to, however you want to think of it, they had this sense of failure, right? They had discerned that the sense that it doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to get shocked. Learned helplessness. I am going to continue to fail because I got an F my freshman year, my sophomore year, my junior year in my math class. Senior year, I'm not even going to try, right? I have this sense of learned helplessness. Doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to fail. Biological preparedness, that basically just means that a lot of us have a biological, a natural, an automatic tendency to behave certain ways, right? So could you condition a cat to bark? Could you condition a dog to meow, right? Could you condition a horse to walk upright on two legs, right? So how much of this can you condition? How much of this can you teach? And how much of it is just biological? Let's see. Instinctive drift. You can also see this called instinctual drift, but instinctive drift, tendency of learned reinforced behavior to gradually return to a more natural, right? So essentially, again, so let's say you condition a dog to meow. Over time, if you don't continuously reinforce that, reward that, or punish, if you don't continuously reinforce that dog to continue meowing, over time, that dog will start barking again, right? Pavlov's dog, if you don't consistently reinforce, if you don't consistently train that, condition that, then over time, that dog will not continue salivating at just the sound of the bell, right? That dog's going to need to see, meat or smell meat. So instinctive drift just means, sure, once you've conditioned to do something, that's great. But if you don't continue reinforcing that, then at some point, that person or that animal is going to return back to their natural way of being. So the horse won't always walk on two legs. If you don't continue reinforcing that, boom, it's going to get back to galloping on four legs. So you can think of dogs with a shock collar, right? Maybe some of you guys have trained your dogs to stay in your yard with a shock collar. If at some point in time you release them from that shock collar, right, they might just take off running. With a shock collar on, they might stay in the yard. But if you take it off, they might, go about being dogs. So Macy, right? Macy Kanalikin gets up every morning early and goes to school. But if you allow her to return to her natural state, right, where we're in quarantine and there's no 8 a.m. school, then Macy might sleep until 10:30, right? She might revert back to that instinctual drift. And then cell phone use in class, right? So you all probably know you shouldn't have your cell phones out in class, or as the teacher's talking, you shouldn't have them out in class. And if you're punished for having your cell phone out in class, you won't have it out, right? But if a teacher does not punish you, if a teacher is very relaxed about that, you will revert back to, all right, now I get to see what's popping on TikTok or whatever it might be. So that's just kind of another maybe silly example of instinctive drift. All right, that's it. Jot down some notes.